I've been doing development work on my multi-part mold system. The idea is to make a plaster mold system that lets you pull the pieces from the side so that you can have undercuts in your pot. Here is an example that I slip cast. This was the first version I managed to get kind of working and printed out, and I learned a bunch of things both in making this as well as in slip casting. So this here is the form for the pot, and it has these wing pieces here so that we can contain the plaster, basically something like that. And I realized that there was a little bit of a sharp edge here, and that's from plaster leaking down between this piece and this piece. So I wanted to join these together. I also poured this horizontally, and that left this little weird bump on the back, and I didn't quite like that. I knew I wanted to change it. And there's no mold keys on the side. I thought I might want to lap these, but after doing a quick practice with that, I don't think that's the case. I think I can do just fine without it. And the last thing is I went ahead and used my kind of horizontal split two-part mold. So basically that lets you split a pot horizontally, and there's a bottom piece and a top piece. And then that top piece I split into quarters. And I wasn't quite liking where this seam would be. For lapping, and I also had code that already did this to be able to split the molds. So with all that in place, I went ahead and did a bunch of redesigns, most of them on the computer, and a few I printed out. So this was, I don't know, revision 5 or something like that. And I went ahead and put the wings on the side. The other thing I did is I added these legs. And that actually puts the pot at a little bit of an angle. And the idea was that I could then have these outer pieces attached, something like that. And there's a piece that goes on the end, and that would let me pour it horizontally flat so I wouldn't have that weird bump on it. I was also playing around with some connecting bits to be able to not have the binder clips, but I was running into tolerance issues with these and they just weren't working well. The other problem is the way this mold is designed. I have pieces that wrap around the sides, and so getting them on was not working well. I basically couldn't get them to fit and to seat properly. This one also has print orientation issues. Kind of no matter what, one of these sides needs support, and this is the side that transfers into the plaster, and I didn't like that. So I went and scrapped all this, and I ended up with this. And this is what we're going to test in this video. This is very similar. It has the wings built in. It doesn't have any legs. I'll talk about that in a second. It also doesn't have any print orientation issues. I basically print this the exact same way I print my normal shape cast molds, just like this, and it prints just fine without supports on the plaster side, so it won't transfer into the pot. There's still this little recess here for the slip well, and that needs supports, but that's it. I have a segmented ring that goes and connects onto the end with all the ridges and grooves. I just attach this with a binder clip. And then I have this piece here, which is basically a normal shape cast outer mold. I made no changes to this. A couple more binder clips, just like that. Now we have something that's very much like a normal shape cast mold. So instead of pouring from this side, I'm going to go ahead and pour in from the foot end. This is a little bit of a narrow target, but I think it will be okay. And then the last thing I did was I made these parts here. And this is actually for the foot. The idea is that we'll be able to capture the foot between the plaster pieces. So instead of stacking on top like that, it will actually come from the side. I'm not too sure I quite like this. I went ahead and put a parting line down the middle. So this is two pieces that come apart. And that's so we could have a deeper foot recess. So this will wind up being upside down like this. And so if we had a really deep foot like this, I don't think we'd be able to pull the plaster out of this if it was just one piece. So we'll see. This might be good enough. We might do some more experimentation. It might be also an opportunity to use TPU. However, I really would like the mold system to work with just regular PLA. This also has a ridge and a groove, so it mates together to minimize the chance for plaster leakage and to help with alignment. I'll mix up plaster, I'll pour it in here, and I'll pour it in here, and we'll be good to go. I think I want to add a few more binder clips to make sure everything is aligned before I do that though. The other thing I'll note is that the regular ridges and grooves normally just went around the inside and outside, but I have some extra connecting ones here on the sides so the plaster can't leak that way as well. These wings here connect the inside from the outside, and we don't have that with a regular shape cast mold. And again, it helps with kind of registration as well as plaster leaking. This probably can get by with a whole lot less binder clips because there's a whole lot less plaster volume, and so there's going to be less pressure on the 3D print. One other change I made is I went ahead and made this a third instead of a quarter. I think that's relatively straightforward. The the other thing is that normally with the outer mold, these flanges here are perpendicular to the face, and I went ahead and aligned them so we can actually have it parting line this way. We want to be able to pull this face away from the plaster. But with that, I think we are ready for plaster. Since we have the 3D model, we know exactly how much space is in here that we need to fill up with plaster and how much space is here. And I went ahead and measured those out. So we'll go ahead and I'll put the dry onto the wet, I'll let it slake, I'll mix it, and then we'll pour. Pour it to the top. Do our foot. I'm sure there's lots of bubbles since the volume of plaster was very little. So I'm going to spend a few minutes tapping this, and we'll come back when it is all cured and ready to demold. All right, plaster set. Don't see any leaks. Oh, looks pretty good. See a little bit of a surface line there. And our seam between 3D prints is pretty good. A little bit that leaked. And normally for this mold, I need to use the isopropyl alcohol to release it, but we don't have a cavity on the inside, so it should just pop off. Although we have more surface area. So the bottom segment, no problem. Good, we didn't get plaster leaking out the sides. The outer mold. Got a little bit of flash right there. But I positioned this seam so it's on the outside of the mold. Oh yeah, no problem. I was a bit worried that would grab on. So this here we can clean up real quick. It is rounded over. It looks like I caught one bubble here, but it's on the side. None on the face. This looks really good. So this and this are basically the same. This one's way heavier because it's wet. But this one here has the extension down here for the foot. And that's what this piece is here. The idea is that this will slide in here just like that. And so we'll have a seam line, but it will be on the foot. And we'll need 3 more pieces to go around the outside. Mold keys worked well. I was a little worried with the mold keys and the draft angles that it would catch, but it turns out that you can actually make a sphere as long as it's sunk down enough that you can pull straight out and no problem. One of the challenges with pouring this way is that we could potentially trap bubbles underneath, especially if there's a deep surface there versus pouring it flat. And we can't get a brush in there to dab it. So you need to be a little bit more careful with your bubbles this way, but I think it will be all right. All right, so I think off camera, I'm going to go ahead and make up 3 more of these so I have a complete mold system. Will let me test how the keys register against each other. However, this looks really cool. Oh, the other thing is that by pouring it up, we get to keep the profile of the inner mold as well, so it winds up with these kind of curvy shapes, but that means we don't have a lot of extra chunky plaster. These here have this big protrusion. A lot of other mold systems that are poured flat wind up having this So there's these sides here that have lots of extra plaster. So this feels much more like a shape cast mold that I'm used to. It's just a third. I mixed up 2 more batches of plaster and have 2 more mold pieces now. So these are reusable, no problem. Just takes a little bit of scrubbing to get the excess plaster off and then reassemble just like the first time. And all of them look good despite mixing such little amounts of plaster and having bubbles in the plaster. The faces look just fine. Had a little bit of chip out on this one here, but it's very tiny and mostly in the surface that abuts this little cylinder piece here. One of the things you'll notice is this is actually tapered. I was actually originally designed it flat to fit into here, but by having it at a taper, it means that we don't need supports on that face versus if it were flat. It's this feature here. If we had it horizontal, we would need to grow supports all the way to there. So small design change. This is really just for registration. So one of those things you think about when you're making molds. These should all just stack on. Mold keys should snap together. Just like that. Now there isn't anything retaining this bottom piece from sliding out. I have to think about that if I want that. But as is, this actually looks really good. There's some small seam lines, but I don't see any big problems. Way too wet to use, but we can put a rubber band on it, see what it looks like. Yeah, just like that. Yeah, I think maybe I will want to put a retaining piece in the bottom. The way this gets poured, most of these pieces wind up being short because as we're pouring it here, it's hard to get exactly up to the top, and there usually winds up being a little meniscus, and so they actually aren't all the same level. So this piece will likely be the bottommost one. The first one I was the most careful with and got it the most full. The others less so. So it should bear right there. Yeah, so I think this will work well. And we have our nice contoured shapes. These corners here are rounded over so they aren't sharp. The only one that is a little bit sharp is this bottom one here. And that's just the way we pour the plaster. Great, this is looking really good. One of the other things, while I'm thinking about it, is I printed this in this orientation just like I do with normal shape cast molds. And people ask about layer lines, and there usually aren't layer lines, but there is a seam line. Basically, as the printer goes around, it needs to stop and start, and there can be a little bit of extra plastic. For a normal mold, where it needs to go around in a full circle, that winds up being in the pot, and I usually use random seams, and I've used scarf joints, and that does help a lot. However, because this part here is the only piece going in, we can actually put the seam on the front or the bottom, and it basically disappears. So this actually looks really good. That's another advantage of going this way. All right, I'm gonna go ahead and set these in front of the fan and let them dry out. I don't anticipate any drama in terms of slip casting this, but we'll find out in a couple days. Everything's dry. Let's go ahead and slip cast it. Do it upside down. There we go. These parts are a little top heavy the way they're designed. There you go, much easier. Just feeling the seam line. There is a little bit of tolerance in here just so that the plaster parts actually fit together. Looks good. We'll just fill it up with slip like normal. One of the nice features is having the slip well back. I missed that on my two-part molds. All right, I'll let this sit and let the plaster do its thing, suck the water out of the slip, and then we'll dump it out. For me, it takes 25-30 minutes with my slip and my plaster to absorb the water to form the clay. Then I let it drain for another 30 or so minutes. While I'm doing this, one thing I changed is I put a slight draft angle on this so it's no longer quite horizontal, but it's very close. There we go. And that's a good wall thickness for me. It just falls off. Perfect. The other advantage is that this sits on the foot. So there is the seam line straight out of the mold. I think that is very acceptable. And there's the foot. Looks like it dented a little bit as it was falling off, so I need to be a little more careful there. But this looks great. Let this dry out a little bit. Deal with the seam line. I think the seam line on the foot is a great place for it as opposed to on the wall. We only have these 3 vertical seams. And that's for this 4-part mold. If we had 5-part mold, we'd do quarters on the top. We might be able to do halves. I haven't thought too much about that yet. My real plan is eventually to be able to do textures on the outside wall. And for that, we'll need more pieces on the side just for draft angles. And the mold did well. I think the only real thing I want to change on the mold is I want to be able to capture this. So instead of just stepping out like that, I want a feature so it can't slide back down, just so when we pick it up, it doesn't want to try and move. And I'm happy with the 3D print as well. I think the only thing I want to do for this is maybe add a little pour funnel for the top. I tend to spill down the side, and this target is not very wide. So I'll probably make that a removable piece that we can just slide in. I was worried about not getting the plaster off of this piece, but there's enough flex in it, at least for this form. Maybe as we change the forms, that will be a little bit different, but so far so good. So I think in terms of mold development, I am pretty well set. The next big task is to make the software generalize to more than this one form. I've done some early testing and a few work and a few breaks, so I have some assumptions built in the code that are not quite right, but I'll slowly work through all of those. And with that, that's the last video in this studio. I'm actually moving really soon, so there might be a little bit of a pause in videos, we'll see, and I'm going to keep working on the software. If you have any questions or comments, let me know. Thanks.